How can we love others without losing ourselves? That's the topic we're going to be addressing today on Flourish-Meant. I'm your host, Tina Yeager. Today, I have an expert guest with a personal testimony on this topic. Her name is Sonja Meyrer, and she has been helping people navigate difficult relationships and situations where they feel stuck, because in 2019, she lost her husband of almost 30 years to suicide after a long battle with mental illness and addiction. And at God's prompting, she chose to dedicate her life to helping others discern how to help, love, and care for someone who's struggling without losing themselves in the process. Welcome to Flourish-Meant, Sonja. I am so honored to have you here, and I can't wait to talk about this conversation. It's so important.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be here. And as I mentioned earlier, I'm grateful to be in a position where I can come and I can share. And I'm encouraged that there are people out there who might need to hear what we're going to talk about today.
So to begin with, let's talk a little bit, if you don't mind, about that journey of how you learned the hard way how to navigate helping someone who is really struggling and in a state of crisis without losing yourself, and the point at which when you felt called to begin to help others who are struggling in this situation.
Yeah. I always say to clients and to friends, when we start down this journey of wanting to help and take over someone's life, it doesn't usually happen with that person. It probably started a long time ago. So I would say that in my upbringing, I learned to be a caretaker, to make sure that I was helping and taking care of the adults in my life who weren't always so good at taking care of themselves. So this pattern of enabling or sort of being dependent on other people started very early. When I got married, I didn't know anything about addiction. It really wasn't in my family at all. And so it was very surprising to me as those last 10 years of marriage, the addiction showed up. I had no idea what to do. In the book, I mentioned that we had a fairly normal life when it came to alcohol. We didn't drink a lot, maybe here or there. He was from Germany, so drinking beer is sort of part of the culture. And it was a very normal marriage, I would say, up until then. And then it wasn't anymore. And when you're standing by watching someone's behavior start to change and their coping patterns start to change, it's a very scary thing. Most of us don't come equipped to know how to help and support someone when they're starting to careen out of control. So I became very interested in asking the question, what should I do? And I was encouraged by my pastor and also by therapists to start attending recovery programs for myself, because along the way, somehow what had happened is I became this expert at letting my partner know, this is what you need to do, and this is where you're failing. But I started to lose sight of who I was. And I started to behave in ways that weren't congruent with what I would consider to be my Christian calling either. So being a constant nag and criticizing and shaming, it might feel like it's justified, but it's really not okay. So I recognized that I needed some help as well.
So for someone who's in this situation, how do they recognize whether they are setting boundaries or whether they are actually doing what you are describing, where they're being that unhealthy, unhelpful person in that crisis person's life?
Yeah, it always starts with recognizing our own behaviors. And there's a tension because we are called, especially as Christ followers, to be loving and caring and compassionate. So we don't get to do away with that. But when we get pulled in the opposite direction, where we feel like our loving and helping is going to fix or change someone or make them do something, that's when we get into some unhealthy patterns. So it doesn't usually start with the other person, it starts with us. Am I telling someone constantly what to do? Believe it or not, people don't always want to hear what you have to say. So am I giving advice to people who aren't interested in my advice? Am I keeping tabs on someone, following them because I have suspicions? Am I compromising my values? And that happens as Christ followers, especially when we slowly start to let our values erode because of somebody else's illness or mental illness. So there are a whole host of different signs where we might say, I think my behavior is not in line with what is godly. And when we recognize that, that's when we can start to think about doing the work of becoming ourselves again. And the way I like to describe it is, in a healthy relationship, you are one person, and the other person is uniquely themselves. And we come together because we enjoy each other's company, we support each other, we care for each other, we drive each other spiritually. In an unhealthy relationships, we kind of become covered by someone else. And on the cover of the book, if I may just hold it up real quick, there's sort of a picture of all of these trees that are shrouding out this other tree, if you will. And this little one that wants to grow is just becoming completely covered by someone else. That's what happens when we get into these unhealthy patterns of relationships.
What are some signs that you noticed when you were starting to go missing, so to speak, where you were starting to lose yourself? What were the things that you were feeling in your body and in your emotions that kind of keyed you in something isn't right?
In the book, I describe the point of insanity when and I know that this is not uncommon. I was in the garage, literally weeding through the recycling bin to count the number of beer bottles. And that sounds a little disgusting, but when you get to the point where you feel like you're losing your sanity a little bit, the thing that's true is now being refuted by the person you love and trust. There's a moment where you feel like, I think I need a little more evidence here. And, when and this had been years into the addiction, when I really felt like I need to start counting. And I was describing, it was hot, it was humid, it was sticky. My hair was in the recycling bin, and I was taking pictures. And at some point I stood up and I said, why am I doing this? This is really insanity, because I knew that I didn't need any more evidence. I knew that there was something wrong, and the person I was doing life with wasn't able to see it. And one of the trademark qualities of someone who struggles with the disease of addiction is the inability to see the truth or tell the truth. So at some point I had to get myself healthy again. Other kinds of negotiations that would happen. Well, if you only drink this, then I'll only drink this. Or I've been doing really well so far. Or I'll go to AA, and then after 2 times, they don't go anymore. So this constant monitoring. How are you doing? How was your meeting? Did you learn anything? What happens is that you just lose sight of who you are. I had gifts and talents. I wanted to be flourishing. I didn't want to spend every night worrying, is he going to come to bed drunk or not drunk? I wanted to live my life. And that becomes impossible when we're so overwhelmed and obsessed with trying to help or fix someone else.
So you were getting sucked into the addict's kind of quicksand of denial with them.
Right. And that's sort of the classic terminology of what we call codependency. And codependency, it's been thrown around there quite a bit, and people use it in some ways that are probably not always accurate. Codependency is, for me, the visual is there's someone on a roller coaster ride. In this sense, it was addiction. And I've strapped myself in next to them, and I'm along for the ride with them. And what I have to learn is how to unstrap myself and get out. And so, this idea that when someone struggles with addiction, we say in recovery circles, we get some on us. It's almost impossible to watch someone deteriorate and know at the beginning what we can do about it. But there's a lot we can do, including setting boundaries to regain our sanity, if you will.
So how do you stay, and to go back to my metaphor of the quicksand, how do you stay outside of the quicksand pit and be an anchor and stay healthy yourself without getting pulled into the quicksand with the person who has a mental illness or who is in crisis or who has an addiction? What are some things that you can put into place to stay healthy and anchor yourself?
Yeah, I believe it starts with 2 assumptions. Number one is that I matter. And, as a Christ follower, if I don't believe that, it makes the work of setting boundaries really difficult, because that person is really wanting us to jump in the quicksand with them, not because they're a bad person, but because they're struggling and it's better for them to have you in there. So if I believe that my life matters, that's a really good starting point. The other, I think, biblical principle is that everyone is responsible for themselves. At the end of the day, it is not my job to assume the capacity for someone else's life or the responsibility. And I think that's a biblical principle too, despite the fact that we are to be loving and kind. One of the things we confuse often is what it actually means to be loving and kind. And I had a client this morning, a Christian woman who was just talking about how hard it was to set boundaries because it made her feel like she was being mean or she was being selfish. Sometimes setting a boundary in love is the most loving thing you can do for someone, even if they don't like it. So those are kind of two anchors that I would say start this process. And then we start to examine ourselves and our own behavior, because it is impossible to set boundaries well if we don't know why we're doing it. And that's kind of the premise for the book. I got very frustrated with people who would encourage boundary setting. You need to go and just tell him no, or you need to go and just kick him to the curb, whatever, but never thought about the fact that someone may not be equipped. And so when you encourage someone to set a strong boundary and they go do that and they're greeted with this wave of pushback, that can be more damaging than to help them and equip them. So I always say we start with introspection. What is it that I care about? What do I value? Where are my expectations not being met by this person? And a lot of times with alcohol, it's not about the drinking, it's about the behavior. When you drink, when you choose to not get help for your addiction, I don't know who's showing up at the door, so that's scary. I don't have your emotional intimacy. I don't have your physical being sometimes with me. Those are deal breakers for me in a marriage. So we have to learn what are the values and the behaviors that are being stepped on. And then we implement some of the tools, acceptance, detachment, and the actual boundary setting.
That's really great. I want to dive into some more practical tips about that in the second half of our conversation. But for now, can you please share with the audience how to get a copy of your book and how to stay connected with you online?
Gladly. So it's called And Then You Went Missing. It is available on Amazon as well as on Barnes and Noble. And my website is sonjamcoaching.com. So SONJAM coaching.com. You can get more information about workshops, about coaching, about the book. And there are some other resources as well. In the book, there's a link at the end with questions where you can get additional resources on the webpage. So come connect with me if you want. For a 30-minute session, we can talk and I can share a little bit more about the book with you too.
I am so glad that you came on the show today, Sonja. And I'm glad that all of you have tuned in to listen to this amazing conversation. I hope that you were inspired to learn more about how you can set healthy boundaries and love others without losing yourself. And of course, I also hope that you hit subscribe and come back for the next episode of Flourish-Meant.